Your parents ran a house where their feelings were the emergency. Yours were the inconvenience. You didn't have a name for it back then. You just knew that when something was wrong, when you were scared, or hurt, or confused, you handled it yourself, quietly, in your room, because bringing it to mom or dad felt riskier than just eating it. That's not a random personality quirk you developed. That's a pattern, a specific one. And almost every single person your age has it. My name is Frank. I've spent a long time watching your generation, studying it. And what I'm about to show you is something most people who talk about Gen X completely miss, because they're too busy talking about latchkey kids and free-range childhoods. That's not the real story. The real story is what happened inside the house, what the psychology of growing up under boomer parents actually did to you. Not the stuff you already know, the stuff that's been quietly running in the background of your life since you were 7 years old. Stay with me. This one's going to hit different. First, let's get clear on who your parents actually were. Baby boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. They grew up with parents who survived World War II and the Great Depression. Think about what that means. Their parents, your grandparents, lived through actual catastrophe, rationing food, losing brothers in battle, rebuilding everything from nothing. Those experiences shaped one core belief. You do not sit around talking about your feelings. You get up, you work, you move on. You certainly do not cry about it at the dinner table. So the silent generation, your grandparents, raised boomers with that exact operating system. Suck it up. Don't complain. Be strong. And they were strict, very strict. Children were seen and not heard, period. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When boomers grew up and had kids, meaning when they had you, something shifted. They loosened the rules. They eased off the strictness. Historians and sociologists even gave the boomers a nickname for how they moved through the world, the me generation, self-focused, self-expressive, chasing their own fulfillment in a way their parents never allowed themselves to. And that sounds great, right? More freedom, less strictness? Sign me up. Except loosening the strictness didn't mean they got better at the emotional stuff. It just meant they were less present. They checked out of the parenting operation. And what replaced the strict supervision wasn't warmth, it was absence. Researchers who studied this specifically found something that surprised a lot of people. Boomers who raised Gen X were not helicopter parents. They were not tiger parents. They were classified as what psychologists call dismissive or neglectful parents. Not the scary kind of neglect, just the kind where nobody really asks how you're doing, where the rules exist but nobody explains them, where you're expected to figure out most of life on your own. One researcher put it like this: the boomer parent provided the basics, roof, food, clothes, school. The emotional infrastructure, that was on you to build yourself, out of whatever materials you could find. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. This wasn't cruelty, it wasn't malice, it was inheritance. They raised you exactly the way they were raised, minus the extreme strictness. They passed down the only tool they had. The question is, what did that tool build in you? Let me paint you a picture. You are 9 years old. Something goes wrong at school. Maybe you got in a fight with your best friend. Maybe a teacher humiliated you in front of the whole class. You come home. You walk in the door. Now, in that moment, you had two options. Option 1, tell your parents what happened, which meant possibly getting a lecture about what you did wrong, or being told to just ignore them, or watching your mom get that tired look on her face that told you this was not a good time. Option 2, go to your room, put on MTV or a cassette tape or whatever you had, and deal with it yourself. Most of you picked option 2 every single time, not because you were avoidant, because you did the math. You were 9 years old, already doing emotional risk assessments. Boomer parents ran the house on what you could call a command structure. There was a clear hierarchy. They were at the top, you were at the bottom, and the bridge between those two levels, the thing that connected them, wasn't conversation, it was compliance. Because I said so was not just a phrase, it was a governing philosophy. It meant, my authority doesn't need a reason, your job is to follow, not to understand. and questioning it didn't make things better, it usually made things worse. Now, there was a flip side to this that almost nobody talks about. The same boomer parent who ran a tight ship on authority could also go completely silent on the things that actually mattered. Ask about sex? Crickets. Tell them you were being bullied? They'd say something like, well, don't let it bother you. Show up crying after something actually terrible? You're fine. Or if you pushed it, and you know what's coming, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. That joke has been circulating online for years, and it always lands the same way. We thought they meant a spanking. Turns out they meant the housing market, the tuition bills, and the melting ice caps. The point isn't the joke. The point is this. That phrase, repeated thousands of times across millions of boomer households, sent one consistent signal to you as a kid. Feeling things out loud is dangerous. Hide it, swallow it, handle it alone. And you were a fast learner. You got that lesson down by second grade. You learned to swallow your feelings because you were told you're fine when you clearly weren't. If you want to understand how that exact dynamic installed a permanent second guesser in your head that makes you doubt your own experiences today, I've put a link in the description to the Boomer Parent Manual. It breaks down exactly how to stop running that 40-year-old survival software so you can finally trust yourself again. The link is in the pinned comment below. Here's something that might feel strange to hear, so I want to say it clearly. You may have grown up not knowing the names for your own feelings. Not because you were unintelligent, not because something was wrong with you, because nobody taught you. You didn't have that class. You didn't have that dinner conversation. You had the emotional equivalent of growing up in a house with a full kitchen, but nobody ever showed you how to cook. You knew food existed. You were just expected to figure out how to make it yourself. Psychologists have a term for what happens when a child's emotional needs are consistently dismissed or ignored. They call it emotional neglect. Not physical neglect. Nobody's saying your parents didn't feed you or clothe you or drive you to soccer practice. Emotional neglect is quieter than that. It's the mom who changed the subject when things got uncomfortable. The dad who disappeared into the garage or the TV. The parent who said, "You're too sensitive," when you were actually just reacting normally to something hard. Over and over, the message was the same. Your inner world is not welcome here. A Texas-based licensed counselor named Janet Martinez went viral in 2022 making exactly this point. She said Gen X is, generationally, the group most exposed to the effects of emotional neglect because boomer parents didn't have the emotional tools and they couldn't give you what they never had themselves. She didn't say this to blame anyone. She said it so you'd understand why certain things feel so hard. Like asking for help, like saying, "I'm struggling," like sitting with somebody else's pain without immediately trying to fix it or shut it down, like hearing someone cry without the feeling to urge them to stop. In Gen X threads online, you'll find thousands of comments on exactly this topic. Some people got lucky, one parent with enough emotional range to make a difference. Others got the full dismissal package. What strikes you reading through all of it isn't the anger, it's the recognition. Person after person going, "Wait, that happened to you too?" And here is something that might crack you open a little. The boomer parents who were the most emotionally unavailable, most of them genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. They thought they were raising strong kids, resilient kids, kids who wouldn't fall apart when life got hard. And in a very strange way, they weren't completely wrong. Let's talk about what all of this actually built in you, because this isn't a story about damage only. There's another chapter. You are, statistically, one of the most self-reliant generations alive. When nobody was managing your schedule, you figured out your own. When nobody explained how to handle conflict at school, you worked it out. When nobody walked you through disappointment, you developed your own, very private, very effective system for picking yourself back up. Pew Research describes Gen X as savvy, skeptical, and self-reliant. Psychological assessment data backs it up consistently. Gen X scores exceptionally high on independence. There's even a term for the mindset it produces, internal locus of control. The belief that what happens in your life is mostly driven by your own actions, not luck, not other people, not the universe, just you. And everything about how Gen X was raised pointed straight at that outcome. That is not a small thing. That is actually a massive psychological advantage. It means when everything falls apart, and in your lifetime a lot has fallen apart, you don't wait for someone to come rescue you. You just start rebuilding. The boomers who raised you were trying to raise exactly this kind of person. They just went about it in the bluntest, least emotionally aware way possible. But here's what's fascinating about the psychology of it. When you watch how Gen X turned around and parented their own kids, the data shows something almost comic. You became the opposite of your parents. Gen X parents became the generation that helicopter parented, the generation that over-explained, the generation that drove to school to drop off the forgotten lunchbox, a thing your boomer mom would have let you starve over as a life lesson. Raised feral, raised their kids in bubble wrap. Researchers who studied this found that when Gen Xers became parents, the pendulum swung hard to the other extreme. Overparenting, anxious worry, often erring on the side of overprotective. Because you remembered. You remembered what it felt like to handle everything alone. And you decided, consciously or not, that your kids would never feel that way. That's not weakness. That's actually the healthiest thing a generation can do. Recognize the gap, fill it for the next one. There's one more piece to this that deserves its own minute. The reason so many Gen Xers are processing their boomer childhoods right now, in therapy, on online threads, in long conversations with friends over a drink, is not because they've suddenly gone soft. It's because they're finally old enough to see it clearly. When you were a kid, you didn't have language for what was happening. You just lived it. You didn't know it was unusual. You thought everyone's house was like that. One of the things that hits people the hardest when they start talking about this is the moment of discovering, wait, other people had it the same way, not just similar, the same phrases, the same shutdown, the same sense that you were inconvenient when you had a problem. A book called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by psychologist Lindsay Gibson quietly became a phenomenon inside the Gen X community, over 1 million copies sold and climbing, because it named something that had been nameless for 40 years. One Gen X reader described it simply as the guidebook to understanding everything that's been spilling out at midlife. The book's central idea is simple. Some parents, not bad people, not monsters, just emotionally limited people, are unable to fully see their children as separate individuals with their own inner worlds. Everything runs through their own needs, their own comfort level, their own moods, and the kid learns very fast to manage the parent's emotional weather instead of their own. You ever notice how as an adult, you're still extremely good at reading a room, at knowing when someone's in a bad mood before they say a word, at quietly adjusting your behavior to keep the peace? That skill didn't come from nowhere. You practiced it for 18 years. You practiced managing your parents' emotional weather for 18 years, and now you probably do it in every room you walk into. If you were exhausted from constantly reading the room and putting everyone else's needs first, definitely check out the Boomer Parent Manual. I actually give you the exact tools to recognize when this old programming takes over, plus the boundaried scripts you need to finally put it down. Click the link in the description to grab it. The complicated truth, and this is the part that takes a while to land, is that your boomer parents weren't withholding because they didn't love you. Most of them loved you enormously. They just expressed love the way they were taught to express it, through provision, through structure, through showing up to the things that mattered on the outside, the soccer games, the school plays, the birthday cakes. They just never got the memo that sometimes a kid needs you to sit on the floor with them and say, "Tell me about it." Not because they were cold, because nobody ever did that for them either. They handed you the only tool they had, and you kept it and built better ones on top of it. Your parents aren't bad people. They just handed you the only broken tools they had. But if they are still in your life, still at Thanksgiving, still on the phone, still dismissing you by saying you're too sensitive, and you want a practical way to handle it, check out the Boomer Parent Manual. I give you specific approaches designed exactly for boomer psychology, so you can say your piece without getting pulled back into feeling like a 9-year-old. Click the link in the description to check it out. You didn't get the emotional handbook. You didn't get the parent who sat with you in the hard stuff. You got the shake it off parent, the you're fine parent, the because I said so parent. And you turned around and became the parent who Googles how to validate a child's feelings at 2 in the morning, because you want to get it right. That's not nothing. That's the chain breaking. Every generation thinks they're raising their kids better than the last. Boomers thought that too. The difference with Gen X is that you did it with full awareness of the gap. You knew what was missing, you named it, and you showed up differently because of it. The silent generation told boomers to shut up and be tough. Boomers told you to handle it yourself. You told your kids, I'm right here. Tell me about it. 3 generations of people doing the best they could with the tools they had. Yours were the first generation to notice the tools were broken and go build new ones. That's not soft. That's actually the hardest thing any human being can do. You are the first generation to notice the tools were broken, and you don't have to keep carrying them. Now, I know 99% of people watching this are just going to keep figuring things out on their own and enjoy the free content, and that is totally fine. But for those of you who are very serious about doing the internal work, and you want to make sure you pass down your resilience without passing down the dismissal, go ahead and grab the Boomer Parent Manual. It's a guide to help you build the emotional tools you never got. If that sounds like you, the link is in the pinned comment. Now, go call your kids. What do you remember about being raised by Boomer parents? Let me know in the comments. Check out one of the videos on the screen next. I'll see you there.